Yes, guys, welcome to the next video. In this one, we're going to be looking a bit more into implications of imports and exports. So we previously mentioned that, during the breakdown of all the economies and GDP and everything like that, what happens when the currency devalues, how that impacts imports and exports. So that's what we're going to be looking at right now. So the imports and exports of a country are very important to look at since its activity can influence its GDP, its exchange rate, and its level of inflation and interest rates. A rising level of imports and a growing trade deficit can have a negative effect on a country's exchange rate. So what that trade deficit means is that there's more imports than exports. So they're essentially purchasing more than they are producing. Also, a weaker domestic currency stimulates exports and makes imports more expensive. Conversely, a strong domestic currency hampers exports and makes imports cheaper. So remember how we were talking about when you devalue your currency, you become more competitive because your prices are a lot cheaper than everyone else. That's exactly what some countries deliberately do to make their exports cheaper for the international economy in a way. So high inflation can also impact exports by having a direct impact on input costs such as materials and labor. And of course, we know that's very important, something that manufacturers always have to consider. Um, so yeah. Now, just in reference back to GDP and what it actually means. So GDP consists of consumers spending on goods and services. That's one part. Then you've got the investment on business capital goods, plus government spending on public goods and services, and then either your trade deficit or trade surplus. So depending on how much you export versus how much you import, that will have a massive effect on your GDP. And just to let you know, you won't ever really need to work this out because it's all done on the data that you see on Trade and Economics and Bloomberg, and especially like the Bloomberg terminal, for example. But yeah, when it comes to a trade surplus, that means it's a positive thing. So more positive trade is going on in the country, which allows the economy to grow and prosper. So that means more exports than imports. Then a trade deficit, on the other hand, is more imports than exports. So the country is consuming more than it's producing. So what are the impacts of a trade surplus? So when there are more exports, it means that there is a high level of output from a country's factories and industrial facilities. So what does that mean for the country itself? You've got a greater number of people that are being employed. It stimulates consumer spending and it contributes to economic growth. So that's exactly what an economy wants. And here's just an explanation to how some countries compete in the market. So a stronger domestic currency can have an adverse effect on exports and the trade imbalance. Higher inflation can also impact exports by having a direct impact on input costs such as materials and labor, as explained before. These higher costs can have a substantial impact on the competitiveness of exports in the international trade environment. So what does this mean? So firstly, if a country has a stronger currency, it can be harder for it to be competitive in the global market as they can't drive prices down enough. So if somebody from Australia wanted to pay for a product, they they would have to pay, let's just say, for example, $5 for a product from India due to them exchange rates, as compared to $15 from America. Because the issue is that America can't devalue its currency, or America's currency isn't as devalued as India's currency, of course. And so what does that mean is that America's currency is increased in value, hence why they can't drive prices as far down as exporters from India. What this leads to is that countries can deliberately make their currency weaker through lower interest rates. So it's when you lower interest rates, that's when you get higher inflation and the currency devalues. So that's the main point. And then obviously that makes export prices cheaper for customers globally. An example is Japan. That's something that they keep on doing. They love to keep low rates, especially compared to the world, so they can have this advantage over them. Now, remember this from a few slides ago. We had that, we looked at the impacts of all the imports and exports. And now I hope this is something really easy to understand, because you've got to appreciate, when central banks, when they affect interest rates, you've got to understand not only the effect within the economy, but the effect in terms of global trade. And global trade is so important to GDP as well. The amount of expenses that they have, whether they're in a trade surplus or a trade deficit, that's going to highly impact any GDP that the country produces in a way. So yeah, dollar down when currency devalues, exporters benefit from cheaper goods. And then when the dollar is up, exporters are harmed because they're more expensive for foreign nations. Anyways, guys, I hope you benefit from this lesson, and I'll see you in the next one.